In my trades math book, along with some of the other books I have, a question keeps arising that you have a defined piece of stock and you got so much on each end that you're not utilizing. And then there's going to be so many holes drilled into that stock in between those two numbers. And I couldn't quite think of, all the possibilities that a person would need to know this for. So I found it rather weird. But anyways, like I said, you get that defined piece of stock. In an example here, I'm doing like 1 inch off each side, and there's 5 inches in the center. And then as far as the circles go, we'll either give the radius or they'll give the diameter of the circle. And of course, if your first circle's right on that line, then you got to deduct the radius off of the piece of material you got there. Then once you have all your measurements, then you got to divide that by the amount of spaces you're going to have. And for 5 holes, of course, that's going to be 4 spaces. And then that will be X and problem solved. But as I said, I couldn't think of all the reasons to actually use this math or why it kept going over and over and over and constantly. Um, then I was thinking, some of my nice files I should actually hang up so they're not just cluttering around and hitting each other in the drawer. And I was looking at a store to see, or a few stores actually, to see if I could find something that would be utilized for this purpose. And after striking out on almost every store I've been to, I decided, hey, might as well just build one of these. I got some aluminum here. I can just cut it to length and determine how much I don't need on each side and how many holes I want to put in it and what the spaces are in between the holes. So, so right away I determined that that math they're teaching us is quite useful for doing what we need to do here. So of course the first thing is cutting a piece to length, and you just run it up against the toolbox where it's going to be mounted, and then um, scribed it for the cut. And next thing here is just getting scribed for how far I want to actually go in with it. After that point, it's a matter of getting some measurements off the actual files themselves. So one of the biggest measurements is I absolutely need to know the widest dimension on that file. So the files can each have space. You can easily grab them and not be cramped for room there. From there, I need to know the dimension on how big the hole is going to be. So what's the size that the file is at the base there on the handle, and the holes have to be smaller than that. And then the last dimension is the largest dimension on the file. The hole just has to be a little bit bigger than that. And with that information, it's just a matter of laying it out after I did the math, determine how many files I could place on this piece of aluminum and what kind of spacing was required in between it. And as soon as I had all that, it's just a matter of you know taking my punch here and punching each one so when it goes to get drilled, easily get drilled. Now on doing that, and looking back, and of course here, it took no time to realize that I should have had a little jack under there to support this end. But I also, if I had to do this again, I would not drill these out. I would just go straight to an end mill and cut into them, and that way you're not trying to meet a hole with an end mill to line it up on the project. Which on a couple of these did not line up the best, and I ended up having to file them a little bit to make them look like they weren't an afterthought. So after getting the holes drilled in this, of course, the next part was, of course, coming with that end mill and cutting into each one and trying my best, to figure out where exactly it is. And you can see on one, not the one being cut right now, but the one just before, you can see it's just off just a little bit there. But a file did clean that up and made it look so it wasn't such a rookie mistake that I made here. The next thing after cutting all these things with the end mills, I did have to put in 3 little holes on the top to drill in, and of course the one you can see inside the cabinet, it had to go right where the structural support was for this cabinet. So I did end up getting, an oscillating tool in there, then a set of pliers to grab it, and actually got that pulled out. And as you can see by the hole there, it wasn't a lot of room to actually get in there and work. From there, it was just a matter of getting the bolts on and getting the nuts on the inside and getting that thing all tightened up. And basically, that was about the end of the project. It was a fun little project to build, and it made me realize that that math they're actually teaching us is for a reason. There it is, perfectly centered or perfectly spaced holes with the same amount of leftover on each side. So after that, thinking that that was probably the only project in the world I'd ever use that math on, I decided to build a storage tray, or not the tray itself, but a storage rack for these 2-inch dies I bought. So the very next thing I had to do is figure out, what length I have, and the length was constricted by, of course, the tool cabinet they're going into, as was the depth, and then working out how many I could actually get, leaving space in between them to to get as many dies as possible in this drawer. I was looking at two separate designs. One was like offsetting every second roll, but at the end of it, when you're offsetting every second roll, you're losing one die per every offset. So I decided just to go with holes that were parallel to each other. So, grabbed a piece of plywood. I could have done some metal, but I got plywood kicking around there, and it's a lot easier to, quickly whip something off with a piece of plywood. Unfortunately, my table saw is put away, but I still do have hand tools. So, lock down a piece of 2x4 for a straight edge, taped it up so it won't chip in that, and cut the piece to length that I needed. Now, this is cut a little short to fit into that box because of the lip on the back. And of course, Orbital Sanders, world's greatest erasers for pencil marks on plywood, or any other wood for that matter. Um, I did miscalculate a few times when I was marking all the lines on this, and there was actually quite a bit of work putting these lines on this, because it wasn't just the one roll. As you can see here, there's a lot of cutting to do on this piece of wood. So the next thing I was going to do is just like screw this down and get these screws right in the center of the holes where my hole saw will be going into. That way, easy peasy when it comes to the hole saw, and just the center of the hole saw will fit into one of the screw holes, and it's all done. So after getting this all screwed in, and so I think it was a two and 1/8 inch hole saw, so just an 1/8 inch bigger than the actual dies themselves. Once getting all this in, then the thing is to pre-drill these so that the hole saws, or the bit in the hole saw, will actually easily find the hole, and I'm not trying to do it blind as I'm going. And after these things were all pre-drilled, then it was just a matter of grabbing that hole saw and starting to cut every single one of these things out. More tedious than anything else. I can't recall how many were on there, but it was a lot of holes that had to get cut through this thing. Although currently I don't even have maybe a quarter of the dies to fill it, so I'm in good shape in the future here for more dies. And of course, started with the hole saw here, and nothing like making 20 pounds of wood chips in a machine shop to have no issues with fires here. So constantly cleaning this up to make sure all that sawdust and wood was out of there. Running air filters to get all the fine particles out as well, so it doesn't settle on anything. So most of these got cut until I got to the very last corner one, and unfortunately, on that very last corner one, where I put the screw in, was just offset ever so slightly, and you can see how I missed it right there. And you can see it's cutting or starting to cut with that hole, so how it's kind of going off a bit. And to me, I like no one else might notice it. In fact, no one else will probably ever see it. But to me, it's just every time I open it, I'll see it. I'll see that that's not at the same distance as all the rest of them. And you can see it right there, like it's that's how far off it is. That hole should be centered on that ruler. So what I did is I grabbed a cut off piece from when I sized that piece of plywood in, and I cut a hole in it with the hole saw and, sand a little bit down there to use it. The next thing is I found exactly where that hole should be centered on, and you can see right there how far off it was from where it got drilled. So I'm really proud or pleased with my drilling on that one. I did, get a measurement of 1 inch, being that the dies are exactly 2 inches. And the concept here is that scribing this thing, it has to be smaller than the actual hole saw itself, or the hole in that next piece of plywood. If not, you'll never see the lines when you put the plywood over top as a template. So I went through it and marked this all and got it ready, and then just a matter of taking the that piece that I cut earlier and placing it on top, clamping it down. Once I was satisfied that the hole was over top of where it should have been, and then it's just a matter of going in like this. So what's happening here is that template on top is actually keeping the larger part of the hole saw aligned to where the hole is. So the drill bit itself doesn't really matter all that much. It will follow the template, and that's it, all cut, ready to go. Again, the world's nicest pencil eraser here, just to get some of the splinters and that off of the cut and get it ready for a little bit of paint. Once I got both sides of this down and pretty smooth, the next part of this was actually going in and trying to smooth those holes out a little bit. As you can see coming up here, I started with some sand, or actually it's emery cloth that I was using, and I figured, just give it a little scuffing with the emery cloth to take any of the burrs or slivers off of the holes. And after doing a couple of these, I wasn't satisfied with how they're actually looking at the end, and also if I was to keep going to the point where I actually liked the finish on it, I would have been there for absolutely ever doing it by hand. So I went through one of my drawers and found this little attachment for a drill that it's like a foam circle with little pieces of sandpaper cut into it, and it did really fast work on getting these things rounded out. And after that, the next step is to just finish this off with a little bit of paint, um, and put it in place. So you can see on here the one side's a little thicker than the other side. And as I said earlier, there's a lip on that tool chest or that drawer for the tool chest. And there's no point um, putting the dies too far back in it because it doesn't open fully, and it'd be really difficult to get the dies. In fact, where I cut this piece of plywood, there's still another half inch that the tool chest will go back. But of course, if I cut it completely to size, there'd just be no way at all that it would actually fit in there, because it'd have to go in an angle and slide in, and it just wouldn't if it's right to size. So it's all painted up now, given a little time to dry, and they're very light coats, and many very light coats, and I had to get it turned around on all angles to make sure that everything got covered. And as I'm putting it in, I didn't realize it at the time, but that's absolutely backwards. That thick end should be up in the top, and you can see now where those holes are for the dies on the top, how they're buried in the back there. In fact, you can see the one die kind of in the back there. It wasn't until I actually got my order of some new dies that I actually realized that was the round and had to flip it over and use it that way, the proper way that is. And that's about it.